This is the second time I'm uploading this video. If you've already gone past this the first time, you can go ahead and disregard this. I just made a quick edit to address something I overlooked in the past, and more information can be found about that in the description. To show players in the room, I need a prefab to show each player, and that requires making a few very minor changes to the current room canvas. So I'm going to go ahead and select the current room canvas in my hierarchy and then enable it. And I actually already have a prefab I can copy and use, and that's from the game or room listing canvas. So let me go find that. It should be under prefabs, UI, and then rooms. So I have room listing. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to rename it to player listing. Open the prefab up, and I have a room listing script, so I'm going to click that. And then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it as well. And then I'm going to rename that to player listing. And once it renames, I'm going to open it. And I need to rename the class name, and make sure you're renaming it inside the player listing.cs file, not the room listing one. So I'm just going to do that real quick. And then I need to change this little bit here. So I'm going to get rid of this part right here, the public room info. I don't need that. I'll make a private player. This will be referencing the Photon player, and I'll call this _player. And then under set room info, I'm going to change that to set player info. And then I'm just going to pass in player class with a lowercase player as the parameter name. And then I will set player equals player. So _player equals the parameter player. And I'm going to set the text to player.nickname. So I went ahead and saved. Now I'm going to jump back to Unity. And I need to add this script I just made to the prefab, the player listing prefab. So I'm going to remove room listing and then add in player listing. And I need to set the text component since I just added the script. So I'm going to do that now. And I have autosave checked, so the prefab should be saved. And then I'm going to populate this prefab under the content. So I'm just going to drag it in and make sure it works. I don't see why it wouldn't, but whoops. There we go. And if I duplicate it, all right, good. Seems to be working fine. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all those entries. And now I need to make it so that every time I get a player update, it populates them into the content object. I need to do a little tidying because the names aren't exactly accurate. So under current room canvas, I'm going to rename room listings to player listings. And I'm going to make a menu script for that. So going back to UI and under my scripts folder, scripts UI rooms, just to be specific, just so I don't lose any of you guys. I'm going to make a new C# script and call it player listings menu. And I made the same mistake I did last time. After I renamed it, I didn't include the menu part. So I'm going to go ahead and add that at the end of player listings. Then I'm going to drag on the player listings menu script. This is going to be very similar to the other one where I add room listings. So I'm going to just go ahead and select room listings menu and open up the script. And I'm going to copy a good amount of this code, basically everything that's internal to the class. And then I'm going to open up the player listings menu, and I'm going to paste all of that in here as well. You're going to get a couple errors, that's okay. It's just missing the namespace. We'll add that in shortly. The callbacks we're interested in are when the player joins the room and when the player leaves the room. You can also get a collection of current players in a room, but you shouldn't necessarily need it as long as you add them as they join and leave. So on player entered room and on player left room is what we are looking for. So I'm going to add public override void on player. Oh, it's not recognizing it because we have to actually add in the pun overrides, which, let me see what the pun callbacks, mono behavior pun callbacks. They changed this up on me, so I'm not remembering it entirely every time. It's not recognizing this name, this class name, so you have to make sure you include the using photon.pun namespace. Okay, so as I were, public override void on player entered room, and I'm going to do public override void on player left room. I also need to keep a reference of all of the players I add to the current room. So I'm going to use this field right here to underscore listings and just change it from change it from room listing to player listing. And then I will populate this with every player listing I make. And then I need to, up here under the serialized field for room listing, I need to change that to player listing as well. And I'm going to rename it accordingly. This is going to be our player listing prefab. So now I need to create a prefab and add it whenever a player joins the room. I'm going to copy this code down here where I do so, except adding a room listing. I'm going to be adding a player listing. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in. I want to make sure that this base class is empty, just see if it needs to be called. It looks like it does not, so I'm going to go back and delete base on player entered room. And I'm going to change this up appropriately. So instead of room listing, it should be a player listing we want to get. So it's going to instantiate the player listing serialized field. And then under listing, instead of set room info, it's going to be dot set player info. And then we're going to pass in new player. And then I will add a reference to my player listings collection here. And like before, with removing rooms, we have to destroy the game object when the player leaves. And I'm going to also use link again to compare that. I'm just realizing though that I have to expose the player as public under the player listing script. So go ahead and open up the player listing script where I will make the player public. I'm going to rename it to a capital P. And then I'm going to do get private set. So I want it to be publicly accessible, but I only want it to be set within this script. So with that saved, I'm going back to my player listings menu. And now I'm going to copy this bit of code right here, the int index equals, all the way down to the bracket on the bottom. And I'm going to drop it down here. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be empty too, the on player left room base. It is. So going back, I'm just going to delete that. And I'm going to do listings dot find index x, where the player property equals other player, which is the player that left. So I'm going to find which player that left is equal to, basically this goes through my listings and finds the player that left is equal to the player property on side the listing. And like before, if it's found, I'm going to destroy the game object and remove from the listing. And that should be good. Let me go ahead and delete this on room listing or list update method because we don't need that anymore. Let me just look over my script real quick. I don't think I'm missing anything, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to the engine. Alright, so I'm going to select my player listings menu, and you can see it's missing the content reference, so I'm going to drag in the content underneath the viewport. And it needs the prefab for player listing, so that's under UI rooms, player listing. Go ahead and drop that in there. So I just did a quick play and it didn't add myself to the room as I created it. I might have to manually fetch the rooms, but also I realize I don't have the ability to join a room from another client. While we list the rooms list, we don't have an ability to join the room. So I'm going to set that up real quick so that we can finish testing listing players. To do so, let's go ahead and head back to Visual Studio. And then let's open up the room listing, which doesn't appear to be in one of my recent tabs. So I'm just going to do a search for room listing. There we go. So I have my class room listing open, and I need to add an onClick function. So I'm just going to do public void onClick button. I plan to have only one action for this button, and that's to join the room. So when clicked, I will do Photon network, and looks like I need to add the using photon.pun. I'm going to do .join room, and I'm going to pass in roominfo.name. So you have to join rooms by their name. So when you click the button, which I'll add very shortly, so I'm going to add the functionality to that real quick. So when I click the object, it will work. And I'm just going to drop my room listing under the content for player listings menu because I have it open. It can go under the room listing menu too as well, the content. It doesn't really matter. So I need to have room listing selected, add component. I'm going to do button. Scroll down a little bit, hit the plus sign to add an event, drag in the prefab, and then I'm going to look for room listing script and do onClick button. And you can do the very same thing as if you opened up the prefab instead of dropping it in. I just have a habit of doing it through the inspector from pre 2018.3. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and go to overrides and then apply all. And then I will delete the room listing, which I dropped into the hierarchy. I went ahead and did a quick build with those changes after I hid the current room listing canvas, as it shouldn't be shown by default. So I have two windows up here. Let me hit play on the editor. And then once it connects, I'm just going to make a room. I'm going to call it my room. Hit create. If I go back to the executable, I do see it in there. So I'll go ahead and click my room. And I can see that I joined it on this side. It's still showing I'm in the create room canvas because I haven't wired up to switch over yet. But I do see that it's adding new players properly. So if I hit X, it looks like it's removing them properly as well. So that's a good start. So that tells me I probably just need to get a list of current players whenever I create a room. So I'm going to go back to my scripts under UI and then rooms. And then under player listings menu, I'm going to open that up. And I have quite a bit of clutter up here, so I'm just going to close everything else out. And under awake, so I need to add that in, private void awake, and this is under the player listings menu. I'm going to get a list of all players that are currently in the room. So I will make a new method, private void get current room players. And I'm going to call that under awake. And within get current room players, I will do Photon network dot current room, which will reference the room we're in. Ideally, you would add error checking to make sure you're not in a room, or rather that you are in a room before calling this. Players. And it looks like this returns a dictionary of players that are in the room. I wonder if there's a way that I can get the players without the dictionary. Doing a quick search, it looks like you cannot. They changed this up from version 1, so I'm going to have to handle this slightly differently. I'm going to have to iterate through the players as a key value pair. So I'm going to do for each key value pair. And according to this, it's going to be an int and then a player. So I'm going to do int and then player. And then I'm going to type in player info as the variable name. And then under collection, I'm just going to copy this line here without the semicolon on the end and drop it into the collection. And then I can iterate through my players and get their values. So rather than write the same code twice, I'm going to go down here and just cut this code out right here. I'm going to make a new method. I'm going to call it private void add player listing. And I'm going to pass in player as the parameter here. And then I'm just going to paste that code right in. And where it says new player, I'm just going to rename that to player with a lowercase p. And then under on player entered room, I'm going to do add player listing new player. That will essentially convert that code over to here. And then what I can do under my for each loop is I can do add player listing, and then I can pass in the player info dot value. Value is the value of the key, which is the second option, so it's player. So I'm essentially passing in this value right here. So I'm going to go back to my editor after I make sure my scripts are saved, and I'm going to test this out real quick. So I went ahead and saved everything, hit play, and I'm going to make a room. And I can see that someone's getting used. I'm going to presume it's myself because I am, of course, the one creating the room and the only one that should have access to it at this point. So now I believe I will just add a callback for when I receive the join room event. So basically when Photon notifies me that the room has been joined. So I'm going to do public override void on joined room. And like always, I'm going to check and make sure this is empty. Looks like it is, don't need it. And then at this point, I will call room canvases dot current room canvas dot show. And I actually need to initialize the room listings menu. So I'm going to go over to create or join room canvas. I'm going to add serialized field, private room listings menu, underscore room listings menu. And I'm going to go down under first initialize and then call the rooms listing menu and then call first initialize, passing in the canvas's parameter. Now I need to go and assign that reference. So I'm going to head back to Unity, where I will select the create or join room canvas, as that's where the script is. And then I'm going to drop in the room listings menu in the field we just made. Now let's test the build and make sure that both players can be seen in the room. Going to create a room, where I hit create. I see that it made the room and I have my name in it. Now I'm going to go over to the executable where I will join the room. And I can see both of us in here now. And this leave room button is not yet functional. I'll set that up later. So I'm going to go ahead and close the executable. And I can see that it is indeed removing the user as it should. I'm going to hit stop in my editor as well. So we're almost done with this section of creating and joining and leaving rooms. This part's, in my opinion, the least fun and most tedious part about setting up Photon. That is if you're using a room lobby. If you're just joining rooms automatically, this probably isn't going to be as much of a hassle for you. So let's, in the next video, finish up. We're going to handle leaving the room and then tidying up a few things like clearing out the list whenever you leave the room or join the room, and that way you're not getting duplicates and whatnot.